Hi, I'm very happy to be able to talk to you about life transitions. This is an area I've been working on for the last few years as part of a major review of life transitions and the relationship to information behaviour and information science. And what I've been trying to understand is the process of transition, how we go through a life transition, and how information systems and information science can help support us through important life transitions. What I'd like to talk to you today is about part of this work, looking at different models of life transitions and how they can be related to information science, posing us interesting challenges for information systems design, information service design, and information evaluation. So let's start by thinking about what a transition is. Typically, transitions are seen as changes to our lives, either coming through some external event or some decision to make a change. And these kind of transitions, particularly important ones such as illness or bereavement or getting a new job or becoming a parent, are ones where we face some of our biggest challenges. These events can threaten our sense of selves, our sense of security and meaning in our lives, and can challenge our sense of control over our own lives. Or they can be very positive events, such as becoming a parent, completing a PhD, getting a new job, that provide new sources of inspiration and meaning to our lives. They're ones that we use to tell stories about ourselves, to understand what's important about our lives, and understand who we are. They're very important events, and successfully managing one transition can help us manage other transitions more successfully. So it's important to be able to transition successfully. But during these events, we are typically asking important questions. We're asking important information needs. Am I normal? Will I survive? How can I cope? Will things be okay? What will life be like after this transition happens? So we're asking critical information needs, but often we're in a difficult information position. So during many transitions, we are either faced with lack of information or lack of information about how to get the resources and support that we need. So often during transitions, we might lack knowledge of who and what to ask, what information might help us. We might lack knowledge of vocabularies with which to search. So we might lack knowledge about important concepts, search terms or phrases that might get us the information. So we don't even know how to start searching. We might lack even basic knowledge of an area of life in which we're moving into. And we might lack anybody in our social circles who can help us. With some transitions, such as buying a new house or becoming a parent, often there are people around us who have gone through the same transition. And they can be very useful. They can provide information, they can help us structure our understanding of the transition, or they can recommend sources of advice to us. But with some transitions, maybe there's nobody around us who's gone through the same transition. Nobody understands what we're going through, nobody can provide help, and therefore we're entirely on our own to find information, or we have to ask strangers for help. During some transitions, we might be in a state of shock. So we might be cognitively and emotionally frozen and not able to use the same information skills that we would use solving normal information problems. And therefore we need help, particular type of help and different information to support our transition. So from an information sense, information is critical to supporting life transitions and supporting them successfully. But we may be in very different situations than in normal everyday life, and therefore find it more difficult to access information, to use it, and to help the transition through information seeking and retrieval. So this is one reason why information seeking and information science is particularly interested in transitions. What can we do to support people through transitions, through good information provision and information system design? In studying the literature on transitions, and I've probably read about 1,000 papers on different types of transitions in preparation for a book I'm writing, hopefully will come out next year, what I've realized is that transitions can take many forms. So not all transitions are the same. They can look different to the people going through them, and they have different characteristics. And these characteristics can affect the information we need and how we get the information. So for example, transitions can be singular or repeated. So, for example, having one child or having multiple children, getting one job or getting another job. Often, the first time we experience a transition is very important. That's when we lack most knowledge, we are most vulnerable, and information is most important. In any future iterations of the same transition, we have some knowledge, we have experience of solving the first transition, so they can be easier. But how we solve the first occurrence of a transition is very important in determining how we solve or resolve future occurrences. Transitions can be positive things like becoming a parent or getting a job, or negative, things like illness or bereavement or redundancy. Sometimes a transition might appear negative, like losing a job, but then it has positive outcomes, such as maybe getting a better job. Sometimes they might seem positive and end up being negative. But this distinction between positive and negative is very important, and I'll talk about this in a minute. Transitions can be what I call in place or out of place. So in-place transitions are ones where the event happens within our normal settings, our normal home life or normal work life, something like an illness. And here we have our normal information environments around us, our normal ways to access information, the people we normally rely on to help us with information. Out of place transitions are ones where we have to physically go somewhere else and become part of a new environment. Transitions such as going to prison or becoming part of a retirement community. They force us out of our normal, usual settings into new settings where we don't know people, we don't know how the information environment works, and we're forced to learn a new information world. Transitions can be internal or external. Internal transitions are when change happens from within, where we decide to change. External transitions are ones where we see something is happening to us, such as an illness. It's an event that happens to us rather than a change that we've decided to make. This is very important and it'll form the basis of some of the models that I'm looking at later. The effects of transitions can be visible or invisible to other people. So some transitions, such as a pregnancy, usually become visible to other people. And transitions that are visible mean that other people can supply us with information without being asked. They can pass information to us. They can act as proxy information seekers, seeking information for us. They might just be useful. Or the effects of the transition can be invisible. And some disabilities are like this. So gradual hearing or sight loss can be an invisible transition until a certain point is reached. With invisible transitions, then we can hide the effect of the transition until we're ready and able to tell it or explain it to other people. But that means other people can't find information for us, but we can hide the situation until we're ready to share it. So we can access information and think about what the transition means to us before we're ready to share it with other people. Transitions can be acute, be short-term, or chronic. Maybe we have to live with the effects of a transition for the rest of our lives. Transitions can be sudden and we have to react to them very quickly, or they can be planned, where we have time to think about the transition, what it might mean, and prepare for it. And usually this means gathering information and using information to decide how to act. Finally, transitions can be stigmatized or stigma-free. So some transitions result in negative judgments from other people in society. And in these cases, people often hide their information seeking. So they fear judgment from other people, so they might not ask information to other people, but take on anonymous forms of finding information. So they're not going to be judged. And these are just some characteristics of transitions. There are many others, but they all affect how we access and how we use information. In the literature in information science, most studies are on acute, sudden, visible, and negative events and in-place events, mostly on illness. So health and well-being is a very critical area of understanding transitions. There's reasons for this. In a very, very nice paper, Baumeister and colleagues did a nice study of different social science disciplines. And what they argued was that bad is stronger than good. Negative events are more important in our understanding of the world than good events, than positive ones. So what they argued is that as a result of evolution, we are primed to respond more seriously to negative events. Negative events are threats. They threaten our existence, they threaten our health, they threaten our family. So if a negative event happens, we spend more time thinking about it. So negative events result in more cognitive processing, more understanding, more interpretation. Why did things happen? How could it have been presented? What are the effects of this event? And more significant changes in how we think about the world. Positive events, we spend less time thinking about and analysing. We just accept them as nice things that happen. With bad events, negative events, we spend more time and emotional and cognitive energy in thinking about. And what this means is, the argument in this paper, is that most disciplines study negative events over positive events. And this is also true of information science. We typically spend more time studying negative problems than positive opportunities. And many theorists have looked at transitions from different disciplines and have proposed models of transitions. So ways of thinking about what people experience during a life transition, such as illness or bereavement or parenting. And typically what they produced are phase models that describe stages in transitions, the stages that people typically go through when they're engaged in a transition. Phase models are very useful. They allow us to characterize what is happening to people cognitively and emotionally at each phase. So each phase is typically described by what people are thinking, what people are feeling, and what people are doing. Most of the authors of these models acknowledge that not everybody goes through every phase, and people might get stuck at one phase, not able to move on. But as I'm going to explain in the rest of the presentation, getting stuck is where information professionals and good information systems and information design can help. So good information environments and good information systems can help people successfully move through the different stages of a transition and transition successfully. So what I want to do in the rest of this presentation is outline some of these phase models of life transition, these stage models that have appeared in other disciplines, such as psychology, organizational work, religious studies, to describe the different stages of life transitions, most of which are quite light on information. And then what I want to do is synthesize these into a new model of life transitions that unifies these existing models, but relates it to information behaviour. So it describes in an information sense what people are doing at each stage of the life transition, and how good information system design, such as this kind we build in our communities, can help people with each stage in the transition. So here's the first model that I want to talk about. This is a theory of our psychological reactions to negative events. It comes from Kate Sweeney and it's called the crisis decision theory. And in this, what she's trying to do is describe how we react to negative, sudden events, such as illness. And what she proposes is the first stage, the first reaction to a negative event, is to appraise the event for its severity, to try and understand the event, what is its causes, and how might we be affected by it. How bad is the event? Bad events are more important and we have to spend more time reacting to them. They might threaten our lives, threaten our family, our friends, our economic well-being or our health. So here, this stage often involves information seeking on the causes of the event. Why did this event happen? How could it have been avoided? What might be the implications of this event? There's also a lot of information seeking on social comparisons. So looking for other people that have undergone the same transition, had the same event happen to them. So who else has experienced this event and what was the effect on them? Understanding other people's experiences is a way of understanding what might be the options for us, what might happen to us. And people who are more familiar to us weigh more heavily in our understanding of events. So similar events have happened to people we know are more important than similar events have happened to people we don't know. But generally, we look for others' experience to understand our own experience. Any information here that makes the event seem more familiar or controllable is preferred. So our information seeking is biased here. We want information that's going to make the events seem more familiar, more natural, more easy to control. If events seem easy to control, then we're more likely to cope with them successfully. So this is basically a coping model of transitions supplemented with decision theory. Next, Sweeney argues that we think about how we're going to respond to this event. What options are open to us to deal with the event? And this might force a re-evaluation of the original event. We might realise as we search for information how to deal with the event that it's more serious than we first thought, or it's less serious than we first thought. And denial can be an option here. It might be that the event seems too big to deal with and we just want to ignore it. And this is where information science can help, by helping people reduce their fear, reduce their anxiety. But what we're doing here is seeing how to act. Next, Sweeney argues that we evaluate these responses. So we decide how we're going to act. What she argues, and a lot of other people argue the same, that we prefer options that help us retain normality, that help us retain the status quo. So we prefer options that help keep our existence as normal as possible. We are normality conserving beings. We also prefer options that require minimum effort, resources, or cognitive emotional effort. So again, our information seeking is biased. We take the path, we take the options that require least change. Another very different model is Roger Strauss's model of religious conversion. This is primarily a model that describes how people change religion, but it generalizes to other types of change. Unlike Kate Sweeney's model, this is not a model of where an event happens to us and we have to respond. Rather, it's a model of how people choose to change from within. They decide their initial life is not working, is not providing the meaning and value that they want to have in their life, and therefore they want to make a change in their life, and changing religion is one option. Typically, though, this does happen as a result of some event. So typically something else will force people into a position where they feel their life isn't working the way they want to. This might be losing a job, ending a relationship, going to prison or something. So people at this early stages just become more open to information on changing their lives, and religion might be one change. So they're sensitized or awareness, newly aware of information on new religions. They're not planning a change. They're not even thinking of themselves as being strategic in information seeking or having information needs. They're just a bit more receptive, a bit more alert to information as it becomes available. So they might be more open to hearing information in casual conversations, on mass media, in newspapers and so on, more aware, more interested in information on that topic. And in Strauss's wonderful phrase, they're groping through opportunities to learn about a new religion as they turn up. And they might finish here, they might not go any further. But if they do go further, if they do, as they start to hear more about a new religion based on interactions with people in literature and mass media, they become more aware of their information needs and have more concrete defined information needs about a new religion. They become more strategic in their information seeking. They seek out answers to specific questions. They seek out people that can help them answer those questions. They focus on learning more about information environments and focusing on good sources of information. And that's where people can be very important. And often this is a process of learning about social norms and practices. So learning about social norms of a new religion, how do people behave, what do they believe, how do they act, and practices for conversion and belonging. What will it mean if I change my religion? How do I do it? And how will I behave once I have changed my religion? Then Strauss argues there follows a phase what he calls doing it, actually making a concrete change to change religion. And this is where change becomes visible to other people. This is still quite experimental. Often people force this change without fully committing to see what the change feels like. And once they have changed, information work doesn't stop there. Often there's information, continual information with information once conversion to new religion happens. So information is constantly used, constantly interacted with to deepen understandings, to keep the transformation, the transition alive, and to deepen connections with other people within your communities. And many religious searches are for known information. They're not searching for information gaps or information needs. They're searching for what people already know exists, to reinforce what they know, what they believe, what Scripture tells them. So here, information is a form of maintenance, a way of keeping the spiritual transformation alive, deepening understanding, and developing a new identity, a new life, and way of thinking about their lives. Another model, which is similar in some respects, is Ebau's model of role exit. So Helen Rose Ebau was a Roman Catholic nun who left the convent, left being a nun, and then became an academic. And she did a major research study on people who engaged in what she called role exit, the process of leaving a role, a position in society with a set of behaviours expected of that role. And so she worked with other ex-nuns, with widows, retirees, ex-prostitutes, former alcoholics, and other people who have left one role in society and developed new roles. And what she was interested in understanding this process. And again, she said this process often starts with some kind of event. Something changes in people's lives that force them into a position where they want to leave a particular role. In her case, the Catholic Church changed its views on what nuns should be. So they wanted nuns to go out in society, to leave the convent and engage in different ways with society. And for Ebau and many of her other colleagues, this changed what it meant to be a nun. So they were clear about what their role meant, but their employer had changed their understanding of the role. And this forced a process which she called doubting. And she described this as a kind of general feeling of dissatisfaction or discomfort with a changed role that becomes more specific and conscious as time goes on. So here, people feel that something is wrong. They might not be able to put their finger on what's wrong or why things are wrong, but their existence just doesn't feel like it's working properly. And people might give off cues by their behaviour at this stage, and that can be very useful because then other people can see that something's wrong and ask them for help, ask for help to provide help or provide information. And people in this stage might spend a lot of time seeking information as how they feel about their own situation, trying to understand how they feel by seeking information about their situation. Next, Ebau suggests that we go into a phase called seeking alternatives. And here people are searching for and evaluating alternative roles. So seeking out information about how they might live their lives differently. And this again can involve a lot of comparison with other people's lives, as well as comparison with lives that they might have had if they hadn't taken up the role they did, or lives that they imagined for themselves. So a lot of thinking about, if I make a change, what will my life be like? How could it be different? And will I be happier in that life? So starting to think about how they might feel an alternative role and gathering information for that role to prepare themselves if they change. Next, she says they're going to what's called a turning point. It's very similar to Strauss doing it, where they make the change concrete. They decide that a position of no return has been reached and they want to leave the role they're in. And then they have to do information work on creating a new identity, a new existence, a new role within society. And this all involves information on creating a new life. Very briefly, I want to cover a couple of other models. This is a nice one from Lockhart and Young, describing business leaders' transitions from one set of working behaviours to another. And this they call the transition curve. And it describes what happened when business leaders realise that their behaviours, their leadership style, no longer works. So the same leadership style and behaviours that led them to be successful are now no longer working. And this often poses them into a position of shock. There's a dissonance, a disagreement with what they believe to be true, that they're successful, with the evidence that they're no longer being successful with the way they're managing and leading other people. And their immediate reaction is typically denial. It's not true, it's other people, not them. But gradually over time, they have to become aware of their own incompetence, that their skills are no longer working. And their confidence in themselves dips down to a process which Lockhart and Young called acceptance, where finally the business leaders have to accept their skills are no longer working and they need to develop new ways of being and new ways of leading their workforce. And then there's information work in creating these new skills, learning how to do things differently, and exploring, testing, experimenting with new leadership skills. And this eventually leads to skills that newly work that are more successful, and integrating these skills into their own persona, their own understanding of who they are and who they are as a leader. Finally, very quickly, this is a very nice model from Williams. And the reason I put this up because it talks about positive events. Almost all the other ones talk about negative events leading to transitions. But here, Williams is talking about the difference between positive and negative events. So things like winning the lottery versus illness. But what he argues is they're both very similar. So both positive and negative events lead us into a process of what we call provisional adjustment. So trying to keep things the same while they're different. But then both positive and negative events lead us into a process of understanding that things are no longer normal. The way that we lived our lives are now different and we have to adjust. So we become confused, we lose confidence in ourselves, maybe depression, and leading to crisis and the realization that things have to change. And then there's a process of reacting to change, either accepting the need to change, exploring routes to change, testing, trialing, experimenting with ways to change, leading us to a new life, or partially recovering, only getting to a position where we can cope, or the new normal becomes an extended crisis. We never learn how to behave differently. We never regain that sense of normality and control over our lives. So lots of different models. I'm presenting them all here as schematics for comparison, including a couple of others I don't have time to talk about. They describe from different disciplines how we change, how we go through a transition, and the stages that these authors have argued that we go through transitions. And what I want to argue and present in the rest of the presentation is that we can generalize across these models to similar stages, what I'm going to call in the middle 3 important stages of understanding transitions, negotiating transitions, and resolving transitions. And using these stages to understand how information science and information systems can respond to successfully support and help people go through these transitions. So first of all, we have life before transition. Transitions happen in a life that we generally understand. And what I put in this box is what I'm calling our normal lives. I mean, normal lives is a bit, is not always so normal and it could be a bit chaotic, but generally transitions happen against the background of some existing life, generally a way of living that has some sense of coherence, value, purpose, and regularity. A regular, everyday normality. Rao Savalainen, in his work on everyday life information seeking, characterized this as mastery of life, a way of living that makes sense to us and over which we feel we have some sense of control. This applies to our information lives as well. So Savalainen argues that we have regularities to our information needs, our information sources, and ways of tackling everyday problems. So we have regular needs, regular ways of tackling problems, regular information sources we use that make sense to us. Some lives are obviously more chaotic than others to outsiders, but typically most lives have their own way of working that's understood by the people in those lives, even if they're not optimal. Then something happens. Not all events cause transitions. Some transitions are ignored, some events are ignored, some are just subtly accommodated into our lives and without much fuss. Some might be put to one side until later. And a lot of health people are at the moment concerned about this with relation to COVID, that people are ignoring important health concerns until COVID is over, but actually causing themselves a lot of health problems in the future by doing this. But change usually happens for a reason. Something happens to us, or it's a reaction to change or a sense that something's not working, or it's a planned change such as migration. But the nature of the event can be critical to what information needs to arise, how they're solved, what support's available. And some transitions are made easier than others by what information we have available, who's there to help us. But issues such as stigma or social capital, social norms are very influential here as how we solve information. Not all transitions, as I said before, are the same. Some transitions are easier and better supported by society than others. The first stage I'm arguing in transitions is what I call understanding. So the first thing we do is try to understand the event and its significance to us. It's not just appraising it for severity, although that's important, but understanding how we interpret the event. What does the event mean to us? So this is a process of orientation towards the change that we're facing. Understanding ourselves in relation to this change. How do we see the change? So if we think of illness, for example, we can see it as just the way that nature works. Sometimes people get ill, sometimes they don't. Sometimes we might see a cause, we might blame ourselves for the negative health event. Or we might see it as an act of God and as part of some big overall plan. Or we see it as part of life's tapestry. We're becoming ill at the same time, maybe our parent became ill and a grandparent became ill, and it's just part of our family tradition. But how we understand the event, how we make sense of it, does affect how we then tackle the event. So what we're trying to do here is understanding how change means and how do we feel about the situation. It's a process of psychological and emotional disorientation. It's a confusing time. And if we look at the words used to describe this stage, doubting, disjuncture, shock, denial, contradictions, crisis, it is a very emotionally intense phase. Imagination can be very important here. So this is a stage of a lot of uncertainty, and what fills uncertainty is not just information, but also imagination. What will happen? How could it happen? What will I feel like? For information science, this is a situation where people know least about the new situation. So they have least knowledge of the situation, least information, but also least knowledge of what information is available. So they don't know where to search, what to ask for, what questions they should be asking, and what information they might lack. If we go to an information professional, such as a doctor or a lawyer, they will often tell us what we should know, not just what we ask. Many search systems only tell us what we answer what we ask. They don't tell us what else we should know. Social barriers, including stigma, might make it harder for people to ask questions of other people. And so they prefer, in this case, asking for information anonymously, such as online search systems or online discussion boards. What's helpful here are solutions that help people identify sources of help. These might be information, it might be support services, it might be other people, and including narrative forms. So I said at the beginning, social comparison is very important, looking for other people who have experienced the same thing and using their experiences to help us understand what's happening to us. So this might be finding other people, it might be finding blogs, discussion forums, books, biographies, anything that describes life change. What's also important here is helping people learn vocabularies. Learning important concepts that can form anchors for searching, learning key phrases, search terms, learning the relationships between key concepts. What's also important is helping people synthesize information. So at the start of a life transition, information overload is very common. People feel they lack information, but at the same time they have too much information and they can't deal with it. So ways to help people aggregate and synthesize information is very important. What's critically important is not just giving people solutions, but helping people understand the problem. What is it they're facing? How does it affect them? So supporting understanding and retrieving problem-based information is very important, not just retrieving solutions if people don't yet understand what they're facing. And there's lots of ways we can do this. There's lots of user-generated content in the form of recommendations, reviews, and personal experiences that can be used to help people, to provide reading lists and support repositories, to point to other people and good sources of information. How to detect this content is often difficult. How do we retrieve information that supports understanding a life transition, as opposed to information that's enjoyable or interesting or valid in other reasons? The next stage is what I call negotiating. And I argue this is a process of gaining control over a situation, often by gaining information. And again, if we look at the words used to describe this phase in the models, response options, strategic information interaction, seeking alternatives, testing, reconstruction, looking for information to decide how to act. I use the term negotiation here because this stage is often a process of optimization, balancing the need for new information, the need for change, against a preference for keeping things normal. So we're seeking to lessen the impact of a change or keep as many things as possible, as normal as possible. So we want lots of options to choose the best option for us, which helps us change but keeps things normal. And even when change is desired, even when change was wanted, there's a tendency to keep a change happening within certain parameters, keep certain things the same while changing other things. So information seeking here is often biased. We have an idea of what response we want. And often this process is trial and error, experimentation, but the stage of negotiating ends with a more realistic idea of where one is heading and what decisions are to be made. For information science, here people have some idea of the area and are doing more serious information work. They're doing more cognitive work. And what's required here is information support to make decisions and compare options, structuring information in order to see what choices are available and what outcomes might happen as a result of particular choices. So there's a lot of what if information seeking. What if I do this? What if I do this instead? What will be the result of my home life or my work life if I do these things? And predicting future needs. So what might be helpful here is helping people identify what needs they might come up against in the future. And again, retrieval systems in particular tell us what we ask. They don't tell us what are better questions we might ask or what we might ask in the future. But we could use search logs to do this. Look at people at particular stages of transition and see what they asked later in order to recommend good queries and good searches to people at a current stage of transition. What we also need is support to evaluate information available. So information on how people can assess the credibility, accuracy, recency, validity of information. Information intermediaries are very important here. Search systems and people. How do we refer people, good organizations that can support them and provide information? Issues of cognitive and affective authority are important. Cognitive authority helping people make trust decisions, but affective authority is also important. Diane Pennington and Pamela McKenzie defined affective authority as the extent to which users think the information is appropriate, empathetic, emotionally supporting, and aesthetically pleasing. So it's not just, is information good information, but does it come from a good, empathetic source that understands the transition? This is very important to deciding what information people accept. The final stage is what I call resolving. It's about constructing a new life, committing to a particular change, and then creating a new mode of living. So here, this is a process of psychological commitment to the change. Sometimes there's a deliberate decision to change, conscious decision to make a change, but often it's a process of meaning making, a process of psychological discovery, of understanding what is important and meaningful about people's lives, and how people can create value and a sense of purpose in their lives. And what people are doing here is trying to make the new transition, the new life, normal by reconstructing narratives of the change, how it happened, why it was done successfully. And this often means creating new information worlds. So this stage, information work, is about incorporating the need for new information into our new existence. For some changes, we just deal with them and move on. But some transitions are more significant. We have new sources of information and new information behaviours. So if we think, for example, of a chronic health condition such as diabetes, if we're diagnosed with diabetes, we're always going to have information needs about diabetes. We might have to monitor certain aspects of our health, and we have longer running information needs than we might have for the rest of our lives. In these cases, information support is longer term. We don't just want information, we want tailored information, information that is new and specific to us, and therefore we need systems that will give us this. We might want alerts for when new information becomes available, and we often have to create ways to collect and collate information, which might require specialist information stores. So if we have to monitor our health, our blood sugars, our blood pressure and so on, we need ways to store that information. If we have to collect new recipes that are suitable for diabetics, then we might need new ways to collect those. So new transitions often require new information solutions. Experiential information, other people's experiences, is also critical. It's critical to interpret what's happening to us. Are my blood sugars normal? Is this monitor reliable? What will this recipe taste like? And we become sources of information for other people as we become experts in our own domain. So we can fill the gap. We can help people at the understanding phase of a transition by giving them information about our experience, our knowledge, our information solutions. Thinking about how we support transitions is hard. It's not easy to know and understand how we support a transition. It's not a single one-off search. We can investigate the process of going through a transition through these stages and how information has contributed to people's management of a transition. Ryo Savalainen described mastery of life as the elimination of dissonance between perceptions of how things are at this moment and how they should be. So a process of regaining our mastery of our own existence, coming from discrepancy about how the world is and how the world is now. And we can think about the transitions as doing this as well. Something happens that forces a change in our life, and hopefully by the end of the transition we get to a new process of normal, feeling of happiness in our life. So how do we get from A to B? How do we get from start to the end? And how does information support us? So we can try measuring how people have identified useful sources of information, developed a new understanding of their life and its potentials, and are happy with the new situation. This isn't trivial, it's a hard evaluation challenge, but it's one that people in other disciplines such as nursing, counselling, psychology face every day. They support people through transitions by providing information and support. And we could think of maybe adapting their techniques to information science. Often the information has to resonate with a person. So the information that's useful for transitions isn't just any information, but information that is acceptable to people, that resonates with them and their need to change. So some information is more useful than others, and it may be that if we can identify which information is better for a transition than others, we can evaluate that. After a transition, we get to a new stage, life after. It's some form of stable situation, but it might, as I said before, be an extended crisis. We never get back to something normal and happy. And previous stages may only allow us to just cope with the new situation. But information interventions can help in such situations. Giving people better and more useful information can help them adjust. But generally, what we have after a transition is a new way of living and a new information world that somehow makes sense to us. So what I've presented here is a three-stage description of life transitions. I've called it understanding, negotiating, resolving. It could easily have been called dissonance, experimentation, and reconstructing, and that's what it's doing. We're trying to understand why something is different. We're then trying to experiment with information and options to decide how to act. And then once we've decided how to act and made that transition, we're reconstructing our sense of identity, our sense of normality, our sense of our new way of living. Each phase is important and has its own aims and also has its own associated information behaviours. People behave differently towards information, try to achieve something different with information at each stage, and different information solutions will help them. So the information that's appropriate for one stage of transition might be a distraction or actually actively useless or make it worse at another stage of a transition. But what we can do is look at the language that people use to ask for help, either as search queries or in discussion forums when they're asking questions, because this can tell us kind of what stage people are at a transition. And being able to identify what stage a person is at a transition can help direct the right information to them and in the right way. How we give people information, how we present it to them is critical. And structuring information support is an important act of supporting people through a transition. Transitions is a rich area of human life, and information is critical to help us deal successfully with major life transitions such as illness, bereavement, becoming a parent, buying a new house, finishing a PhD. The same information skills we use in normal everyday life may not be appropriate when we're dealing with transitions. We might not have the same psychological resources to access and understand information. We might be emotionally stressed and not able to take in information, or we might just be simply frightened of what information we find. The good information system design can help us transition more successfully, make it easier to access information, to understand information, to evaluate it, and to use it as we support ourselves through and support others through important life changes. So supporting life transitions is one way that information science can support people through the most important changes in their lives. Thank you for listening.